is the opposite of the law of synthesis. So it's if you have one thing, you can break it down into two opposites. So it's essentially the inversion of the law. It's also much less important, but it still is used. Balance. Balance. Law of balance is kind of like the law of self-knowledge. It relates directly to the magician, and it states that you should maintain balance in your universe. So it's really a moral statement, but it's important for the practicing of magic. Law 7, law of infinite data, states that there are an infinite amount of things to learn. It's also called the law of infinite number. 7a directly relates to that in a weird sort of way. 7a states that our senses are finite. There's always something that we cannot access with our senses. Even so, like looking at faraway galaxies, if we didn't have thermal imaging, we wouldn't be able to view them in the same sort of way because we use that for certain things. Giving thermal imaging gives us a certain way to view them, but then there's probably something else that we don't know how to do that would give us another way to look at things. So, like, we don't have the ability to see things through ultraviolet light. Well, hypothetically, it's possible. I mean, maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Basically, it's just that there's always something you can't see or can't access because of your senses. It's a supporting law to the law of infinite data. Law of infinite universes states that there are an infinite number of ways to look at the universe. That's actually all the law states, but it does go a bit further when you apply the single most important law to it. That law is the law of pragmatism. The law of pragmatism states, if something works, it's true.
So it's an epistemological proposition.
Yeah. So then if you apply that to the law of infinite universes, you can go from, well, since there's an infinite number of ways to view the universe, and viewing the universe being the universe, like differentiating each of those views completely is useful, therefore it's true. The law of pragmatism is really interesting, and it's sort of troublesome, but the laws of magic find a good way around it. They're very cohesive. Yeah.
Does it go the other way if something's true and it works?
I'd assume so, but it's not explicitly stated or used. It really focuses on the fact that if something works, it's true.
What about if something doesn't work, it's false, or if something is false?
Well, if something is
Well, if
false,
if
it
something
doesn't, won't work. With
Well,
false
that
and
would-
true
that
are
would
consistent
follow.
inequalities, so you can assign.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, could you say what you're saying about the combination of 8 and 9?
The combination of 8 and 9. So 8 is that there are an infinite number of ways to view the universe. If it's useful to take a way of viewing the universe and think of it as an entire universe itself, then it's true. It is an entire universe itself. It's applying the law of pragmatism very liberally.
Right.
Which, can anyone think of like serious problems that would come up by applying the law of pragmatism really liberally? Because I could think of, yeah, what's up, Pamela?
Wasn't one of the serious issues if something seems true and it turns, or no, it seems like something's working, but if you look at it at different levels, you realize it stopped working, or it didn't work the way it was intended, and therefore it's not true.
The law of pragmatism would still hold that. Because it only
Yeah.
says that if something does work, then it's true. It doesn't say if something
If
seems
it
to
worked at all, it's true. If it didn't work the way you thought it was, well, it was still true. You just didn't
I'm
understand.
basing it more on the Kantian idea that if one's intentions were not good, and something good happened because of it, is it still true? You know what I'm saying?
Right, so if you...
If you do something with evil intentions and something good happens because of it, is that ultimately a good action?
Good and
And
evil are
is it
probably based
true?
on perception.
That's a huge derail. Yes.
So what do you mean by if it works? Like what counts as works?
That's subjective.
Okay.
Yeah, this is kind of the hole that people fall into when they're looking at magic. They're like, really, it's actually that liberal. You can just do whatever with the law of pragmatism. And yeah, you kind of can. In fact, we're going to talk about chaos magic later, where they really do whatever with the law of pragmatism to a completely ridiculous
They
extent.
abuse it liberally.
Yeah. So some issue is if looking at the universe a certain way is useful and it's true. So that means that like if it's useful for you to view reality a certain way, that's true. But that could be contradictory with something else very easily, right? So I could view each person's body to just contain a certain type of energy and there's no like electrical impulses. And if it's useful, it's true. But it's true that the body contains electrical impulses. There's a paradox there. Can anyone think of like anything else along those lines? Maybe there's like a better example. Alright, we'll go with that one. That is solved by the law of true falsehoods, which, very simply stated, is if there's a paradox, it's probably true. Which is weird. What that means, well, it's essentially applying the law of synthesis. So, you have A, which is true, and B, which is true, but they're contradictory. Through the law of synthesis, there's probably something you don't know that relates the two of them that's even more true. So you actually don't have a problem, you just have something you don't know.
Doesn't that also involve law 3A, law of similarity, in which you were considered perceived great paradox?
Sort of. The law of similarity is more directly related to how objects relate to each other. So if an attribute applies to object A, then if you apply object A to object B, that attribute in some way applies to object B. Like feathers can fly, so if you put feathers on something, that thing is more able to fly than it was. That's one of the weirder laws right there. Let's keep. What's
It's the one about true falses that's sort of rejecting the excluded middle.
Yes. It's adding a third possibility. Because in the law of the excluded middle, you've got A is true and B is false. B is true and A is false. And this is adding A and B are both true because of something else that is more powerful.
I think I thought of a resolution for your question about the Kantian intent. I think it's that if something works for your purposes, then it's true for your purposes. Might be
That's one way to look at it. It really depends. That's kind of like a distinction between types of magic. So sort of like the kind of thing you would come up in religion where someone's like, well, it works in this way, and then someone else thinks it works in another way, and then you just end up with two different parties. But there are people who view it that way. Whereas there are other people who say, well, if it works, it's true, and that's an objective truth. Yeah.
But whether or not it works is subjective. So this is taking a subjective thing and making
Yeah.
it objective.
I know. It's fucking weird. Yeah.
So, if I understand it correctly, with the law of pragmatism, you could say that drinking bleach is a really way to poison yourself.
Well, it isn't.
But it doesn't-
poison yourself.
It just
It does, so it works as a poison.
Yeah.
So, does that mean? I guess it still works because then it's true
Well,
that
because it's true that it's a good way to poison yourself.
Yeah.
Because it works.
But it's not true that bleach is inherently poison.
it is.
Bleach is inherently poisonous to humans. Yes.
It's actually
It is true.
poisonous to all life. It's a biocide.
Yeah. Yes, bleach is inherently poisonous.
But that's not what we use it.
no, it's
Oh,
not.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that bleach is a poison would be true.
Bleach is
But bleach
poison,
is
would be true.
poison.
But not bleach is nothing but a poison.
Ah. Well, that would come down to the law of true falsehoods, right? Because so it kind of.
Bleach is a poison.
You'd
and
end
it's
up with
also
bleach as a
thing of
poison,
soap,
bleach
which
as a
aren't
cleaning
mutually
agent.
exclusive at all.
So then you end up with like a combined truth that is bleach is a poison and a cleaning agent.
Most cleaning agents are at least kind of poisonous, except water.
So last. Oh yeah.
What is power?
For our purposes, let's say power is the ability to exert your will over the universe. A source of knowledge is something that expands your horizons in a certain sort of way.
What is the source of knowledge?
What is the source of knowledge?
Wouldn't that be
That becomes a theological question. For a lot of what we're going to go over, the answer would be God, like the Christian God.
It's outside of us, though.
No, for other certain things, it's inside of you, which is actually a great example of the next law, which I'll actually quote when I get to it. So, law of personification states that if you have a phenomenon, you can treat it like an entity. So,
Like a sentient entity.
yeah, you can do that.
So like yelling at your computer.
Yeah, yelling at your computer is no longer crazy. Your computer has no.
Well, specifically the phenomenon of your computer not doing what it's supposed to.
Yeah. So the main
Yelling
law
not
states
to
that
your
any
computer,
phenomenon
it's not
may
doing
be
what it's
considered to be alive and to have a person. And that's a little troublesome, but it's just kind of how it works. And that plays directly into the laws of evocation, which take it a step further and make it useful. They say that you can invoke or evoke any entity. Yeah, you can invoke or evoke any entity. Let me explain what invoking and evoking are. Invoking is to draw that entity into yourself. Evoking is to draw that entity up into the outside world. So summoning spirits is evoking, summoning spirits into yourself is invoking. There's a quote from Aleister Crowley. What page is it on? Oh, here we go. It is more convenient to assume the objective existence of an angel who gives us new knowledge than to allege that our invocation has awakened a supernormal power in ourselves. So, essentially, it's more comfortable to personify a phenomenon than it is to just accept the phenomenon.
And hence, personifying the phenomenon is true according to the law of
Because it works.
pragmatism.
Yeah. Everything ties into the law of pragmatism.
Why is the law of pragmatism ninth if it's so long?
That's the way the book works.
Why does it being comfortable?
Because I mean, that is one of the ways in which it works. So, how do I clarify this? Alright, so you evoke a spirit in order to learn more about quantum mechanics because it's really fucking confusing. And the spirit tells you some certain things about quantum mechanics. You're like, oh man, thanks. Crowley would say that it's more convenient to assume that the evocation evoked a spirit that came and taught you about quantum mechanics than it is to say that the evocation unlocked something within you that allowed you to access information about quantum mechanics. Which works, because it's more comfortable. And since it works, it's true, so there was a spirit. Yeah.
So it's not universal that if something's comfortable, that makes it work.
No.
It's only the it's comfortable that it works.
Yeah. Kind of.
But in this case, it works because it's comfortable.
Right. But works is a weird term. It only applies to certain things. It's not all things that are comfortable work.
So
But
it's like Occam's pillow.
Yeah. Yeah. Alright. So those are the laws of magic. We're now going to start applying them to more stuff. Before we do that, does anyone have any questions on the laws of magic and how they actually function? Law of polarity states that if you have one thing, you can break it down into two opposites.
Could you say what the law of identification is again?
Law of identification is if you are suitably similar to an entity in a certain kind of way, you can become that entity and wield its power.